Welcome to Stories from Palestine podcast. My name is Crystal and I am your host. Every week on Monday, I publish a new episode of Stories from Palestine podcast. If you want to know more, you can go to storiesfrompalestine.info, find all the social media links and the link to the Ko-fi page where you can donate something to the podcast, which is very much appreciated. You can subscribe to the email list so you will never miss an episode. And at the end of every podcast, you can learn some Arabic words with my children, Louisa and Hadi. This episode, I'm going to take you on a tour. You know, I'm studying the tour guide program at the Bethlehem Bible College. It's a 2-year program. We study history, archaeology, geology, architecture, culture, and flora, fauna, everything one needs to know about Palestine. And part of the program is that we do excursions and we visit the historical sites. Now, due to the COVID pandemic, it has been quite challenging this year. Many sites have been closed or they are still closed. So that is a bit difficult. There is also a rule for the bus that everyone has to sit without somebody sitting next to them. So yeah, we have to rent a big bus and that is much more expensive, obviously, than a minibus. And last week, I told you that I was going to share the money donated to the podcast with the students who have financial troubles and they cannot afford to pay for the fees. And many of you did go to the Ko-fi page and support it financially. And I want to give a big shout out to all of you who did that. The students are really grateful for your generosity. It's been also a big moral support for them, knowing that there are people who care about them and also care about the future of tourism in Palestine. Because, you know, Palestine deserves tourism just like any other place in the world. It's a beautiful place. It has a long history and tradition, great cultural heritage. And a lot of people, especially in Bethlehem, are depending for their income on tourism. So never hesitate to come and visit us. If you are having any concerns about traveling here, feel free to send me an email or a message on Facebook or Instagram and I'll be happy to advise. So last week we did manage to go on a trip and we went to several sites in and around Jericho. We went with a Palestinian tour guide called Kamal Mukarkar. He's from Beit Jala. He has worked as a tour guide for the last 10 years and he is teaching us everything about tour guiding in Palestine and about the historical sites. Now in today's episode, I want to take you to some of the sites that we visited and share with you what we learned. And it's too much what we did for one episode, so I'll cut it into several episodes. I had wanted to use some more audio of what we recorded during the tour with Kamal, but unfortunately most of it was a very bad quality, so I don't want to do that to your ears. But still, you will hear Kamal speaking about the Nabi Musa site because that's quite a reasonable audio file, although you can still hear some of the airplanes flying over at some point. So this podcast episode is a bit of him and a bit of me. And we will start now from the beginning. We left Bethlehem at 8 in the morning. It was a Sunday morning, so it was quiet because in Bethlehem there is a big Christian Palestinian community. So most people were either still at home preparing to go to the church or still asleep. Then we drove through the city. We first went up towards the Church of the Nativity. And that is obviously the location where, according to the tradition, Jesus was born. We went past the Nativity Church and then down towards Beit Sahour. And Beit Sahour is known for a story of the shepherds that were in the field in the night with their sheep when an angel appeared to announce to them the birth of Jesus. Now, actually, in Beit Sahour, there are 3 locations that are indicated as the exact spot where this event happened, where this story is remembered. All of them have caves that are venerated as the place where the shepherds were laying in the night in the field. One is for the Greek Orthodox, that's in the middle of the town. One is for the Catholic Church. And then there is one on the premises of the YMCA, and that is for the Lutherans. And the name Beit Sahour means the house of vigilance. Beit means house, and Sahour refers to those who were staying up late at night to watch their flock, and those were the shepherds. It is a town with a majority of Christians, although there are 2 Muslim tribes that lived here originally. And then in 1948, when a large number of Muslims from the area around Jerusalem was made refugee during the establishment of the State of Israel, Beit Sahour got a lot of new Muslim immigrants, let's say, refugee immigrants. Now, from Beit Sahour, we continue to the east, and now the landscape starts changing quickly. We are starting to reach into the desert landscape. Especially now, after the long and hot summer, the desert is dry and yellowish. We pass the St. Theodosius Monastery on our way, and here there is that famous spot from where Palestinians can see the Golden Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. We all know that site of Jerusalem. When you see photos of the old city of Jerusalem, there's always that golden dome in the middle. But Palestinians from the West Bank and from the Gaza Strip cannot reach Jerusalem without a permit. And it is very difficult to obtain such a permit. So this is the place from where they can see the Golden Dome of the Rock, but they can't reach it. Now, as we pass by the St. Theodosius Monastery, and if you want to learn more about monasticism in Palestine, you can listen to a previous episode that I made about monasticism in the Jerusalem wilderness. And from here, the road starts winding down, steep into the Valley of Fire. This is called Wadi Nar. And this valley used to be the place where the trash from Jerusalem was burned, and that's why it's called the Valley of Fire. It is also the continuation of the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem. And that is a valley that is indicated by all 3 monotheistic religions as the location where the final judgment will take place. Now, it is for sure a scary road. I remember that 12 years ago when I first drove here, it was even more scary because now the road has been renovated. But at that time, it was really a bad road and it winds down with very sharp turns deep into the valley. And down in the valley, it smells very bad. This is the sewage water that comes from parts of East Jerusalem where many houses are not connected to the sewage system. And the Palestinians had received promises from Germany for financial support to build a sewage water treatment plant. But as this area of the West Bank is under full Israeli control, it has not been built. The Israeli authorities only wanted to give a permission to the Palestinians if they would also treat the sewage coming out from the nearby illegal settlement. And that's something that the Palestinians could not commit to. So a treatment plant has not been built. Now the road winds up and we leave the bad smell behind. And this is the only road that connects the north and the south of the West Bank. It's hard to imagine, but it is the reality. There are no other connections between the north and south of the West Bank. Now you have to understand a bit the landscape here. It is very hilly. So it's a desert and there are many hills. It is not easy to create roads. So this is the only road that was over a longer period of time established and that is now accessible for cars. But if the road is blocked, and that happens sometimes because as we go up, we reach a military checkpoint. And this is a checkpoint that is not on any border between the West Bank and Israel. This is a checkpoint on the main road between Bethlehem and Ramallah, between 2 Palestinian towns. Usually, if we would go from Bethlehem to Ramallah, for example, and then to Jericho, we would go through Jerusalem. And it would be only a 15-minute ride from Bethlehem to Jerusalem and maybe another 15-minute ride to Ramallah. But now, because Palestinians are not allowed to go through Jerusalem, it takes at least double that time because we have to take this back road, this road called Wadi Nar. We cross the checkpoint. There is no problem today. We are not being stopped. It's called the container checkpoint. a tradition that came into being when in the past some people had set up a container from where they would sell some drinks and snacks for the people who were waiting on the checkpoint. So until now it's called the container checkpoint, even though the container is not there anymore. After we cross the checkpoint, we continue and we see the big Ma'ale Adumim settlement coming up. It looks from the top, looking down on it, like a big oasis in the middle of the desert. This is a Jewish-only settlement, an Israeli settlement in the east of Jerusalem. This is illegal by international law. It's built on the land of Palestinian landowners. Their land has been confiscated and they haven't received any compensation for it. The name of the settlement, Ma'ale Adumim, was also the name of the ancient road that we are going to take. Ma'ale means descend and Adumim means red. It refers to the reddish kind of stone in this area, and the descent is the slope of the hill towards the road that we are going to continue on. It is also said sometimes that red refers to the color of the blood that was often found here when travelers were attacked and wounded by robbers, because this road is an ancient road. Yeah, now it's paved and asphalted, but this is the location of an ancient road, and it connected Jerusalem to Jericho. Originally, it was a road for traders and travelers, and they would go on their donkeys and their camels, and over time, the road would be hardened and kind of paved. It would make a clear track. And then when the Romans came here, around 60 before Christ, they started paving these roads, and they made them straight, big, easy for them to move their armies, and also easy for traders, travelers, pilgrims. So the Roman roads made many places in Palestine more accessible. And it is on this road that we are having our first stop. We are visiting the Good Samaritan Inn. Now you may know the story from the Bible about the Good Samaritan, but if you don't, then I will tell you. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus is asked by an expert in Jewish law what one must do to get eternal life. And then Jesus replies him with a question, and he asks him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And then the man replies, "Well, it says in the law that you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and you have to love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus replies, "Well, yeah, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." And then the man wants to know, maybe he wants to trick Jesus a little bit, then who is my neighbor? And now Jesus replies him with a parable. And a parable is a simple short story that illustrated a morale or a spiritual lesson. And it was very common in that time to use parables. Many Jewish rabbis used parables, and Jesus was Jewish, and many people considered him a rabbi. So he answers him with a story. It was easier to remember these stories, right? It's a time of oral traditions. The majority of people did not know how to read and write. So Jesus tells a story of a man who is traveling, and he is attacked, and he is robbed, and he is left wounded on the side of the road. And then a priest, a Jewish priest, passes by. But when he sees the man, he avoids him. He doesn't want to deal with it, so he leaves. And then a Levite comes by, and a Levite was also a Jewish man from a religious family, and he also ignores him. And then finally, a Samaritan man stops, and he gets off his donkey and helps the injured man. He even takes him with him on the donkey, goes to an inn, pays for the man until he recovers he can stay in the inn, and he even says to the innkeeper that, "I will come back a few days later, and if you need more money, I will pay you." Now you have to understand that in the time of Jesus, the Jewish people had a very bad relationship with the Samaritans. They considered them pagans, they were different. Jews would even avoid going through their territory. So when Jesus used this Samaritan as an example in the story, he did it for a reason. So now Jesus asks the man who asked him that question, who do you think is the neighbor? And of course, the conclusion is that the man who showed mercy is the neighbor. There are many different ways to interpret this story, and I am not a theologian, so I will leave it to everyone personally to take a lesson from the story. But this story appealed to many followers of Jesus. And since the 4th century, we read about this location, where we went now with our group, as being associated with this story of the Good Samaritan. Now, obviously, this story never really happened, right? It was a parable. But the people must have thought, well, Jesus told a story. He must have had some place in mind when he was telling it. And it could have happened in a place like this. Here is the road for the travelers, the winding road going steep down towards the Dead Sea. It's between the hills and the rocks where robbers can hide easily. And then we read from the hand of Saint Jerome in the year 385 that he interprets the name Adumim as being from the Semitic root for the word blood. They had a color red for referring to the blood of the victims that had been robbed on the road, and that the blood was shed here in the valley, and that's why it was called the Blood Valley or the Red Valley. Now, the early Christian pilgrims who passed here on their way from Jerusalem to visit the baptismal site by the Jordan River, which is, according to tradition, the place where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, they came through this road, and for them an inn was built, a guest house, and a church. And this location, ever since that time, remained a place where people could stay the night. During the Crusader time later, there was an inn. They even built a watchtower, a Crusader watchtower, to guard the site. And until today, you can see remains of that Crusader watchtower on the other side of the road. And then during following centuries, the place was used in the Islamic period as a khan. A khan was a rest place for travelers, because it's known that if you travel with a camel and donkeys, about every 18 kilometers, you need to rest yourself, but also your animal needs to drink water. So on these trade routes and on these traveler routes, there used to be khans or inns about every 18 kilometers. In Arabic, the name of the khan is Khan Hatroura. And during the late Ottoman period, so in the beginning of the 20th century, this khan was renovated, and the building that we are visiting is still that Ottoman building. It's been renovated again a little bit, but we are visiting the khan. So the place we visit has been used as an inn or a khan since the 4th century, and it is named after the Good Samaritan, the story of the parable of Jesus. The building has been used for a short time during the British Mandate as a police office by the British to control the area. And in recent years, it has been renovated and it has been turned into a museum. And as they found the mosaic floor of a 6th century Byzantine church here, the museum, that is a mosaics museum, now has an indoor and outdoor space. Outdoors, you can see the floor of the old Byzantine church, and indoors, you can see different mosaics that were brought in from different parts of the country, dating from between the 5th and 7th century, from Christian churches, from Jewish synagogues, and from Samaritan synagogues. There's even a beautiful mosaic floor that came out of Gaza Strip that was part of a synagogue with depictions of a lot of animals, wild animals, that seemingly lived in Palestine in that time. Actually, until today, there are Palestinian professionals in mosaics. It is a very specialist work. If you see how meticulous the work is to fit all these different pieces of stone and glass and marble and sometimes mother of pearl into a design, you must really appreciate the result. Now, obviously, the site is in the West Bank, so it is in the area that is military occupied. And according to the Geneva Convention, it is prohibited for the occupying power to exploit historical sites in the occupied area. But this site is run by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority. So Palestinians can visit, they can go and buy a ticket and have access to it. But if things were fair and equal and just, then they would be running this site by themselves. So after visiting this site, we got back on the bus and continued our way down towards the Dead Sea. On the signs along the road, we can see that we are going down steep because it is indicated how far we are above and then below sea level. So when we reach the sign that says we are around sea level, I joke that I now feel comfortable because, I'm from the Netherlands and our country is mainly on and below sea level. So this is where I feel the best. We drive only for 5 minutes and then we take the exit to the right towards Nabi Musa. Nabi Musa is a place where Muslims venerate the prophet Moses, in Arabic Musa, and in Hebrew Moshe. So all three monotheistic religions value these prophets of old. We take the road that leads us away from the highway into the desert, and then we all look in awe at the building that rises up in front of us. It's a building with beautiful domes. It's like a small oasis in the desert. There is even a man with a camel. He's probably waiting for tourists, but it's quiet, too quiet. I think the COVID pandemic really affected the people here a lot. There are literally no tourists. The only people who are visiting are locals like us, and we are the only group. I haven't seen anybody else so far. Kamal takes us into the courtyard of the building, and it's beautiful. These buildings date back to the Ottoman time, but the site itself has had a shrine and a hospice for the pilgrims since the Mamluk time, so since the 13th century. Of course, I will post pictures on my website so you can see everything there. We're going into the courtyard of the building and we find a place close to the shrine with the tomb of Moses, and then we listen to Kamal.
I told you the story in the Bible that he was standing on Mount Nebo, where he was able to see the Holy Land but not enter it. This is where he stood and gave his last speech. We call it Deuteronomy. In Arabic, Tathniyah. شو يعني تثنية? He repeated the law, right? Repeating the law. Don't forget, you enter this land, don't make peace with the people of the land. You fight them, you kick them out until you get everything. He repeated the law, and then he died there. Then the story continues with Joshua and the Israelites, which we will hear later once we go to the Jordan River. Now, you're going to ask me why there is a tomb for Moses here in the Holy Land, near to Jerusalem. Well, there is a Muslim tradition. One tradition that says he loves the Holy Land so much, he rolled underground until he reached here. And that's why his body is here. Another one, and the idea is that the Holy Land is Jerusalem. So he didn't reach Jerusalem, he died before reaching Jerusalem, right, which is here. So in both cases, that's the idea. But I have to bring you back to the time of Zahir Papyrus, or Salah ad-Din, the ones that started the whole idea of al-Maqamat, and I'm sure you studied al-Maqamat. And the idea was as simple as there is so many Jewish places, so many Christian places in the Holy Land, but there is only few Muslim holy sites, which is in Hebron and in Jerusalem mainly. But then that's it. So the idea was to build al-Maqamat for holy people that have passed, lived, or died in that spot. So the idea was to build a maqam for Nabi Musa, and they chose this one. Now, another tradition says that from here, that this was already a Khan before they even decided to build the tomb here. And the Khan was most probably Crusader period. And from here, people were able to see Mount Nebo. All right, you could see Mount Nebo. Once we go up, you could see Mount Nebo. So imagine it's like, oh, there is Moses, hundreds of years. There is Moses. Here is Moses. Right? He became here. Instead of looking at him, it became the place where you look at him. Became the place where you believe that's where he was buried. All right, makes sense? Tradition, technically. Right? Maqam Nabi Musa, other than the real tomb that we're gonna see, which nobody's inside, typical maqam. You studied this. I spoke about this in Hebron. So this building stayed as a khan. As I told you, caravans need to make a stop every 18 to 19 kilometers to drink water, and this is where they would stop to drink water. The camels will drink in the middle. People will go up and take a room and sleep for a night, and this is what you call a khan. And it stayed like this through Mamluk era and Ottoman era and so on. This place had a history. And the history of this place that later, in the 19th century, Christians of Jerusalem had a tiny problem. And their problem was not their Muslim neighbors, they loved them, but it was during the Easter feast. Many pilgrimages will come to the city of Jerusalem, and the Christians like to turn the city into really like prayer area for Christians. So they asked the Ottoman king, let's say, that please do something. We would like to have the city of Jerusalem for ourselves at least during that week, which is the week of Easter. Make sense? And his idea was, okay, let me think. Why don't I start a feast for Muslims in the same week of Easter week? And the feast of the Muslims, we'll call it Nabi Musa feast, which is actually remembering not only Nabi Musa, it's remembering all the holy people, all the prophets in that feast. And the idea was to come here and stay here for a whole week, and that'll be the same week that the Christians are celebrating up. Now she's going to tell me, wait a second, this can't happen. Why? Because Muslims follow lunar calendar, Christians follow sun calendar. How can it fit together? How can always the day be the same, right? How? Well, simple. When we celebrate Easter feast as Greek Orthodox, we celebrate it after the lunar calendar. So it does fit together. Remember, we follow the Jewish tradition when it comes to Easter feast, so it can fit together. We don't celebrate like the Catholics and the Protestants. As Greek Orthodox, we celebrate after the Jewish, which is lunar calendar too. So many people wrote about this festival that used to happen here. One guy wrote in the 20s that it was beautiful, it was everything, colors from pink to purple. He said it's everything but organized. This is exactly his sentence. It's everything but organized. So it wasn't really organized. And this stayed. This stayed till the British ruled the land. And I have to tell you, there is no communication at that time. No telephones, nothing, right? So imagine this is a place where everybody from the country will join. And they will pray, that's true. But at the end of the night, what do? You sit, you speak, you have a party, but then you speak about your problems and so on. So this was a place where the rulers, like the British and later the Jordanians, saw there is a chance for Palestinians to regroup or for them to make a rebellion against them. So they thought we should stop this. This is not good for us, because this is what everybody needs. Something could start from this. This is where usually revolutions in the Holy Land starts in Jerusalem. And you're technically in Jerusalem here. This is part of the Jerusalem district. This is where all Palestinians will come from different districts and they could start something. So that's why the idea was to stop it. And they pushed to stop it as much as they can until they were able to stop that festival from happening. Now, during the Israeli era, after 1967, this became a place where drug addicts used to be held, especially the ones in Jerusalem and in Israel. They would come here for them to stay, like everybody in one room, so that they will stop taking drugs and so on. And in recent years, since tourism had picked up, with the help of Turkey and I think European Union, if I'm not mistaken, so much money came to this place to restore it and to bring it back to its history. And now all the rooms are really well done, and people could rent these rooms and sleep. Your groups could come here. You could book these rooms for your group, especially if it's a Turkish group, a Muslim group. They would love to be here beside this holy spot.
We ended the visit to Nabi Musa with a walk around. There are many Muslim graves close to the building because it is believed by Muslims that if you are buried close to a person who is considered to be holy, it will give you more blessings. So that's why there is a lot of graves around Nabi Musa. The graves are not very clearly indicated, so you have to be careful there, I realized. And I took some photos, nice photos and a video there, which I will post on the website storiesfrompalestine.info. And then we got back on the bus and we continued our trip to Jericho. We went also to the Jordan River, the Dead Sea and Qumran, but I will leave that for another episode. Hey Louisa, today we heard the story of the Good Samaritan. Yeah, we want to know a few words in Arabic. So for example, how do you say the road?
شارع.
And how do you say, because he came on a donkey, how do you say donkey?
حمار.
And there was one man, he was a good neighbor. How do you say my neighbor?
جاري.
He was a real true friend. How do you say friend?
صاحبي.
Thanks, Louisa. Shukran. Hadi is making party in the living room. Hadi, can you repeat these words for me? Will you niet? Hadi doesn't want today to do it. Do you want to say the words, Hadi? No, Hadi is playing disco in the living room. Okay, next time, more luck. Next time we will learn new words in Arabic. Thank you, Louise and Hadi. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode where we did a tour from Bethlehem towards Jericho with visits to the Good Samaritan Inn and the Maqam of Nabi Musa. If you have any questions, any comments or any feedback, I would love to hear from you. It's really nice to engage with the audience. So when I finish talking, please go to the website, find my email address, find the Facebook or Instagram, whatever you prefer, and drop me a few lines. It's really nice to hear from you as listeners. I can also advise you, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, to go to your app store and download a podcast player if you haven't already done so. It makes it a lot easier to tune in weekly because once you installed it, you search for Stories from Palestine and then you have all the episodes in one place. And if you subscribe or follow, then you get notified when the new episode is online. So then you will never miss an episode. There are many different podcast players, but the main ones are Apple Podcasts for the iPhone and Google Podcasts or Spotify for the Android phones. And of course, I repeat weekly how much it helps me to continue creating these stories if people give a small donation. I have a Ko-fi account for that. That's a place where you can buy me a cup of coffee or more in the local context, a sandwich falafel. And it is very easy. You can just go to the Ko-fi page and you can do the donation there. All these links can be found on the website storiesfrompalestine.info and in the show notes, which you can see in your podcast player. Thank you very much for listening this week, and I hope that you will be with us again next week.